Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of The Shift. I'm Marnie Robbins, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mindy, my main gal, Han Coop. And today we're talking about something that might feel a little unexpected for an HR podcast, and that is podcasting itself. Not podcasting in the download count, sponsorship deal sense. We're not here to talk about growing your audience. We're talking about podcasting as one of the most underused relationship building tools HR and people leaders have. And in a world where HR leaders are stretched thin, burn out, and have quietly lost some of their own voice, that might be exactly the shift worth making. And that's exactly why today's guest has built his career on this exact topic. Mindy actually connected us. She calls Greg the expert of podcast. And after this conversation today, you'll see why. He's actually walked us through a comedy of errors this morning already. Greg Wasserman calls himself a relationship generator, someone who creates opportunities by connecting people, ideas, and conversations in ways that lead to real business outcomes. He built that instinct across 2 decades in relationship development at places like Yahoo and CBS, and in startups along the way, always finding the through line between a good conversation and a real opportunity. Today, as head of relationships for RSS.com, one of the world's largest podcast hosting platforms, Greg's mission is simple. Everyone should have a podcast, not as a content play, but as a relationship engine. His own show, Podcast Network Insights, is proof of that concept. So, Greg, welcome to The Shift.
Thank you guys so much. We don't have to talk anymore. You did such an amazing job. Anyone that's listening to this, you got the answer right there. Done.
Marnie's brilliant at the intros. She's brilliant at them.
And then it all goes downhill from there.
No, uphill.
Uphill. But one of the things that I did love about our intro conversation with Greg was you talked about through line. And that's actually how we start every conversation, maybe a little obviously, but to get us kickstarted in the conversation, Greg, what is the story or your through line that got you living by the idea that you say life is all about time and relationship?
So if you think about taking yourself back to a child, for me, childhood was I was an athlete, had a very competitive brother from an academic standpoint. Parents are like, all right, you got to do well. So you're doing the academics, you're doing the athletics, but you realize as you grow up, you're at least my parents threw me into sports. You threw into some kind of club. And you realize as you start growing, like people move out of those places, but that doesn't mean that your friendships are over. And so you just start realizing everyone's going into different clubs and different activities, but you love these people. So how do you bring them all together? And so I look at some of my friends who I played sports with, but then went on to play magic cards. I'm like, what did I know about magic cards? Besides like the article that I just read that like they're massive and billions of dollars, whatever, right? And so you're like, well, I can go hang out with these people. Like they're good people. I play sports with them, right? So you just started understanding like how do you connect the dots between friends? And that's ultimately led me into like career, as we can tell, just listening to me. I love to talk. My background's in sales. Like I'm a salesperson in that regards, but more of a relationship generator. And that's because I'll go into a sales meeting going like, look, I've got something to sell, but what I have to offer may not be what you want. So let's just connect because we all know people leaders, every one of us, we're all not staying at our career or staying at the same job that we were like our parents for that matter. I look at my mom, 41 years at the same company, same school for that matter. So how could I go if I like Marnie, if I like Mindy, like let's have a half-hour conversation. Let's get to know each other. Let's connect. I'll give you the sales pitch, but like you ultimately tell me what you're looking for. And my job is not necessarily to sell you what I have, but to help you solve a solution. And so if I don't have the answer, I guarantee you I'm talking to other sales reps here who probably have the solution. So I can go, Mindy, Marnie, I'm going to save your mailbox, all these emails you're going to get, which would be amazing for you. I'm going to introduce you to 3 people that will actually do what you're looking for. And that's the trust building, the relationship you're building. I'm not trying to just sell you on something. And that's ultimately how I've lived most of my career because life is about time and relationships. So let's create that relationship And the timing today may not be right, but who knows where the timing may take us. And we could look at that from an HR standpoint, like you're a great person, but not the right fit for this role. So let's stay in contact. Keep in contact with me because maybe I'll have another role, or maybe I'll be like, oh, I know the right person that I should bring in to create a role for. And so all that kind of goes into the way I look at life.
So good. We talk about humanity here on the shift quite a bit without ever meaning to. It seems to be the underlying theme of many a conversation. And I think that is a shift because I think often, even in HR, you're getting also just sold a lot of things. It's a lot of noise. And so you don't want to become the very thing you're running away from. And podcasting sometimes has its connotation of being like could be salesy and versus relationship building, which I love your shift in mindset around podcasts and just the need for connection. I think that's another thing is we've lost the art of connecting in humanity and how to have conversations. And so how are you kind of seeing the relationship building through podcasting actually helping us reconnect and build the connection muscle?
So the way I look at podcasting, this is why I say everyone should have one. So it doesn't matter what industry. That's why I can have this conversation with everyone that's listening to your podcast is if you use your podcast for relationship building, meaning let's say you have, we can go down multiple paths here, right? So you're an HR leader, bring on people from your company and start bringing those conversations to light. Use it as a recruiting tool. Use it as just how do we bring light of conversations and people inside the company, what they're doing, what they're working on, and create that connection, that moment. You're not looking for how many people are downloading this. You're making that person feel good. You're building a relationship between you as the host and the person you're bringing on. I always say I use it as lead magnet. And so you're like, great, how do I go ahead and find talent? How do I go find different people that I could bring on? And the people you're bringing on are ultimately the people you want to build relationships with. Like that's the key piece. Who do I want to build relationships with? Those are going to be my guests. And those guests then, as we did here, you do a 30-minute pre-call. So like, great, how do I get to know these people? Start getting an understanding of, are they married? Do they have kids? Like actually the human component of them. But also then you start mapping out what would this conversation be like when we actually sit down as we did here for a podcast. And then just as we're doing right now, you bring that person on and you have that conversation. So now you've actually got about 90 minutes of a connection with this person, but it becomes completely different because most of us, and I've heard this many times, people are like, oh, I don't need to have a podcast. I'm having these conversations already. I mean, that's exactly why I started a podcast because I'm having the conversations with my guest already. The difference is it's behind closed doors. And once you start having that conversation as a recording, it changes a completely different atmosphere, changes the vibe, but it also makes me feel like my voice is being heard beyond just this internal conversation we're having that's not being recorded. So there's so much more I can continue to say, but like I don't want to get long-winded because I tend to do that. But that's kind of the way I look at it.
What I love about that is you said 90 minutes of connection that we've already had. And it's like now, yeah, I know Greg. We're tight, as far as as that connection piece. But I also think of the conversations that you're having behind closed doors. When I think altruistically, the reason we started the shift was, look, Mindy and I are, yes, we have expertise in people and culture and human-centered design, but really there's so many more great stories out there and bringing those people to light. And so I think that relationship building is not only internally between the guest and the host, but how can we share with our networks? And I'm even thinking from a people and culture perspective, like career seekers, you name it. Where have you seen the best case study for a podcast really being born out of just strictly because naturally they felt that a podcast might be cool?
I mean, I guess I could look at mine, but like if we go back to, I think your intro that you were talking about, Marnie, what I believe is we're too often, and I know even in the HR world, we're all metric driven, right? It's like retention, salary, like everything is metric driven because that's just kind of the world we have to live on. I look at metrics as a relationship building. And so if we start moving away from using podcasts and going, how many people are listening? How many downloads did I get? This isn't worth my time and effort. Because we know HR leaders, like leaders in general, you are overworked, underwhelmed, stressed out, burnt out, taking on one more thing that just it feels like work. But when you treat it as, hold on, relationships aren't work. I mean, they are because you want to keep cultivating it, but like you think about how much value comes out of a relationship, where this takes you, not only from the company standpoint, but from your career standpoint, from the thought leadership standpoint. So if you move away from these metrics of like, I need to get downloads. I mean, I look at my numbers just for the sake of having it because I want to get I hit 20 episodes, celebrate and promote it out there just so that I can feel good about I made it past the 8 episodes that most people don't make it. But beyond that, I'm just looking at what are the connections, what are the relationships I'm able to have? And then how do we use that? Once again, life is about time relationships. We have no clue when those relationships will come to fruition. It's my job just to keep cultivating it. No different than how I do with you two. It's like, I'm not expecting to stay in contact every 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, but it's not hey, 2 years have gone by. I need something. So now I'm reaching out to you. That just feels then transactional. And no one likes to feel transactional. So as a leader, as an HR leader, is an employee, like no one wants to feel like a number. So if we can use that podcast to build those relationships, to cultivate them, to create something that's more than you're an employee here, or I'm using this as a recruiting tool. It's a relationship engine. And that's the key piece for me.
I think it also, when you come through that way, because I've listened to podcasts, you can pick up when it's not about relation. And I'll just turn it off because it does feel very transactional, cold, and scripted. And it feels like a point's trying to be forced versus a natural conversation like developing. And I can imagine like the HR leaders, they're in conversations all day long, and being able to also kind of showcase the type of conversations happening in your organization in an organic way, and being able to have people get a sense of that would be able for individuals to both see how our company is doing things differently internally, but also capture what does it feel like to be in this organization? Who is in this organization? How are they thinking about things? And how might I be attracted to that or not? Or how might I, as a leader, want to take some of that because it's inspiring to me? I'm like, oh, I never thought about it like that, doing that in a company. I want to go try that out in my organization. Because I know for me, when I'm listening to podcasts, I am so inspired and I think differently and I get into curiosity and ideation. It kind of takes me out of the weeds of my day to day and helps give me a perspective from, someone else. I get to see into someone else's snow globe, which is kind of fun. I think in HR, we often can get into the weeds and get siloed in. And having conversations is another way to step back. And we just get to ask questions and hear from someone else.
100%. I mean, if you are bringing people into your office and going like, hey, let's sit down and have a conversation. Imagine if you were able to record that and the questions now you're able to get out there. And in some cases, no different than how we push people to, hey, fill out this, how do we get a net promoter score that we're going to go use as a marketing tactic so that we can tell people of how great our company and our greater culture is and yada, yada. It's like, what's better way than actually bringing your employees on into a conversation or bringing in leadership? Or I mean, you can look at it as bringing in vendors. Like there's so many different conversations as an HR leader you could look at. That's not just a internal marketing tool, but how do we strengthen our relationships with anyone for that matter you want? Like I'm not saying you have to only do this style of podcast. I'm just saying, what are the relationships you would love to cultivate? And that would be the basis of your podcast. So if you want to cultivate the relationships with your vendors and understanding, hey, what are you doing to help my company? And now you're able to go and say to your bosses, like, look, we're working with this vendor and I've now got a half-hour conversation with this entire vendor suite of why I've chosen this company or why I'm not choosing this company based on the conversation. Like you do 50 of those conversations. Now, that is my thing. You do 50 conversations, that's a week, but that's 50 relationships. But you could always do it in seasons. Like there's so many different ways to look at how you approach this. You're like, all right, I can do a season where I talk to vendors. I do a season where I talk internal employees. I do a season here. So like my whole thing is of course the 50 episodes, but for anyone that's listening, like if that's overwhelming, there's so many different ways to think about how you would structure this. At the core of it is the relationships and what do you do with those relationships thereafter?
Well, I have so many light bulbs, but you had said the relationship driven is the goal of the podcast. But if I am wearing an HR or people pro hat and I'm in an organization and we talk about NPS scores and we go on listening tours and we have these one-on-one conversations, and I'm remembering the old adage like the HR and the cardigan, and like that one-on-one provide me feedback type of situation. But throw a podcast in there, and then all of a sudden, the vibe and the tone is a completely different conversation, because then it's for you're almost establishing weirdly trust through exposure because that conversation is open for others to hear. What's interesting about that, let's say we're talking like our first season that we wanted to focus on was for internal team members. What would be the first step? Like if I don't know anything about podcasting, like what would be the thing that I want to focus on like, yes, I want to build this relationship. Now, what do I got to do?
So, I mean, from a tactical standpoint, from a system standpoint, it's very easy. I mean, I'm the head of relationships for RSS.com. We have a free hosting platform. So to get your voice out there, you could record it. We're currently recording over Riverside. You could do it over Zoom. It's not it's not highly recommended, but you could do it, right? It's just getting out there. You don't need a $1,000 mic. So we're not talking about expensive. The nice thing is there's so much technology that'll help you clean up a lot of the sound, but ideally be in a quiet room, get a good mic. It's $100, $75 on Amazon, easy. Figure out what you want to call it and the graphics. Always understand the strategy of like, what am I calling it from that standpoint? Let's see here, what else? Record it. We didn't talk about this, but ultimately you're going to want to repurpose that content. So let's put that on a shelf. I'll come back to that because we've been so focused on the relationship component. But in terms of the questions you want to be asking, like, what do I want to get out of this? And those are going to be the kind of questions that fuel. You can, as you guys did, you gave me a list of questions beforehand. So we all have the power of AI. It's like, great, I've got Greg coming on. This is what I want to talk about. Give me a list of questions, knowing that it's going to be still free form. So like you've given me some structure, but we're kind of just going with wherever this takes us based on where I guess my answers come and where you guys want to take the conversation. But at the end of the day, you can choose how long you want that conversation to be. I say the 60 minutes. Because remember, I'm not focusing on downloads. I'm looking at, hey, if I can get 60 minutes with this person and get 60 dedicated minutes with them, that's going to be more from a relationship standpoint than I would ever imagine. That if no one wants to listen to, because the average listening time is about 38 to 45 minutes is an average podcast. So if you're as mine, some of them are over 60 minutes. And I know that's probably deterring people. They're going to look and go like, hold on, 60 minutes. I don't have 60 minutes to give this. Great. You turn those clips, you turn them into any handouts and information that you want, and it actually becomes the content fuels the conversation fuels your content engine. And so as an HR leader, I'm now able to go, great, I had this great conversation. I connected with Marnie. I gave Marnie assets, so she promotes it. I want to touch on that from an HR standpoint as well, but there's the value of now, what do I do with that conversation? I could turn it into a handout that I send to employees. I can turn this into, here are the lessons I learned. I can turn this into a listicle. I can turn this into a worksheet. I can turn that conversation and then asterisk all my conversations into all these different pieces of content that fuel what I want to be doing as a further an HR leader.
I mean, I think that's like so powerful because HR leaders really are having a lot of conversations all day long. But I also love to, and I hadn't thought about it this way, but sometimes in organizations, HR leaders aren't always in a place of trust. They're not seen by others. They're not the person that you're going to want to open up and talk to. There may be like a power differential depending on who you're talking to. But immediately, if you're in role of I'm the host and you're my guest, that like changes, that kind of shifts whatever maybe role that you're in before and whatever feelings about that. It kind of takes you from being the HR person to now being this podcast host, and you're my guest, and now we get to like have a you're not talking to just the HR person, you're talking about the topic we've selected based on all the great things you just told us, and we have some structure for this conversation. So it kind of takes us for a moment outside of these roles that the workplace has put us into to maybe have a platform for a shift of a conversation that we maybe couldn't have had without that, which I hadn't really thought about the benefit of that. And if I'm going to be having these conversations anyways, so much better than, okay, we talk about having stay conversations. We talk about having, after an engagement survey, let's do some focus groups, or let's dive in deeper talking to some people. If we're actually putting these into podcasts, now we're getting to create other content like, all right, there's some things that all these employees are saying that maybe we could put into some manager training. Maybe we could it goes from there, like the whole list of all the things. And now we don't even need an engagement survey. Now now we're getting a sense of where people are at if they feel trusted to share.
If anyone's just listening to this, I have like the biggest smile on my face based on what you're saying, because that's true. Like the guard comes down. If I look at it from I'm getting an email, or you get an email from HR saying like, I want to talk to you. All of a sudden, sweating. What did I do? Right? Like no one. It's like going to the principal's office. Like, what did I do? Why is HR wanting to talk to me? It never feels good in that regards, which is a problem. It's like, how do we change that? But if all of a sudden go like, hey, I value you. I would love to bring you on to the company's podcast, or I would love to bring you, like, wow, you feel that is a completely different feeling that creates a different kind of trust. It's not I'm trying to get you now. Oh, I can't wait to get you on this podcast. Because remember, your goal is to make your guest look good, which ultimately makes you look good. So you don't want whoever you're bringing on, an employee, your leadership team, your vendors, industry professionals, whoever you are trying to talk to, you're building a relationship. So the last thing you want to do is ruin that by, haha, I got you to say something, and now that's not going to happen, which is somehow what happens when it's behind closed doors, or the objective is unknown, but if the objective when it's a podcast, you're like, here are the questions I'm going to ask you. This is the purpose of the podcast. This is why we're doing this. This is what I want from you. This is what I want to give you. Like all that actually becomes. So back to like, I had the biggest smile as you were saying that, because that's literally what I tell everyone. If from a sales standpoint, when you're using from lead gen, it's like, imagine you're trying to cold call or email people, and they're like, nope, delete. I don't want to talk to this person. Come on my podcast, like, I'm going to respond to that same exact thing from any medium.
I think about too the case of, I don't know about you, but how many times I've had to come in after maybe a tough decision that a company's had to make. Maybe it's a reorg, maybe it's, something along those lines. And so I want to talk a little bit about vulnerability in the podcast arena. And I'm reflecting back on a time where I had to send out an email of like, hey, we knew this was going to happen. We said that this was the North Star. It feels really gross right now to people. They're scared, they're unknown. And so when I look at it from a people and culture lens of, there might be an opportunity with an internal podcast anyway, to be able to have these conversations with your CEO, with your founder, with your CFO, or just even to recap or retro in a way that is more humanizing and more honest and contextual to bring. So it's not always highlighting the best, but potentially highlighting us in our messiness. And so that brings me to, kind of pondering of, does that work though? Like in my brain, I feel like this is that seems like an excellent case study, right? But where does that break, or what should we be thinking of if we're saying let's have an honest conversation about what's not going great?
I mean, from that standpoint, everything doesn't go. I mean, life is messy. Life isn't perfect, right? So I think that's the joys of having a podcast, is you can have those messy conversations. You can have those honest conversations, and you can breathe light to it. The other side is if we think about town halls, right? I mean, think about where town halls have come now. who's raising their hand to ask the questions of leadership? Who's asking it's been a while I've had a town hall, but it's like the benefits question, or like, when are we going to do this? It's like, how do we then bring that up into a podcast and then give people the ability to engage with that conversation in a completely different way than the canned town halls, which we all know how those kind of all work out. But yeah, you could do an entire season of like, all right, I'm going to bring in the leadership. We just had this messy situation. We had, whether it was layoffs or we missed our numbers, whatever it may be, you are able to guide that conversation and build the trust with your company. Maybe you're not the host, and maybe your founder, maybe your leader is the host. Like, no one's saying you necessarily have to be the exact host. I'm just saying everyone should have a podcast. It's just a matter of how you want to take that. You guys are doing it as co-hosts, right? So like, it's very easy for, great, the HR leader and someone else, we're going to be co-hosts. Like, you've got the ability to structure it really how you want. The point is, what are the relationships we want to build, and how do we strengthen those? Because right now, we're not. We're relying on AI to do a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
We're what is it? We're in a pandemic or epidemic of loneliness. So I think as an HR leader, we have the ability to control a conversation, to build that connection, to build that trust in whatever capacity we want to. Once again, depending on who we want to talk to, what kind of relationships we want to build, but we have the ability to do that. And there's another thing which we haven't touched on, but I think I keep saying this over and over, so I feel like I want to drop this other pin in here, is we're also living in a state right now where we are turning to our employees and asking employees to be voices, to be brand advocates, to post on social media, to help drive, the recruitment of our company, going like, oh, I love working here, and here's why. So if we are leaning on our employees to be these brand advocates, to talk about our company and what they're doing there, then shouldn't we also have a podcast and showing then our employees, hey, I have a podcast. I'm going to bring you as a guest, get you comfortable so that hopefully this becomes your next piece. Because if you can engage a I was going to say plethora, but I just love that word, but a quorum of your employees to all start their own podcasts, and now each one is a brand advocate, and we don't care. Like, let's just face it, HR people. Like, once again, as already said, we're all going to be leaving a company. The goal is in HR is like, how can I help this person stay here as long and empower them? But if I'm a engineer and an engineer starts their own podcast interviewing other things about an engineer world, but they're talking about our company, and then they leave our company and they go somewhere else, great. The podcast stays with them. That's okay. But at least for that moment, they're talking about us, they're fueling us, and it's our job to help those employees become a voice for our company so that what we're doing with the culture we're building is being elevated by our employees. So I'll pause there, but like, I knew that was something I wanted to touch on because that is a key piece for why everyone should have a podcast, but as an HR leader, how we can show that as a cultural component for our employees and build that culture that I think right now most workplaces are asking for.
I love that too, because it's building muscle, like around helping someone get behind a microphone, communication skills. How do you connect? So if you're asking them to come on and be a host, or, maybe they're a co-host first with you. So they're learning through doing and being able to ask questions. You have to be curious. It's not like, okay, yes, I can ask AI, but if you really want to be in a conversation. It's not like you're just reading off every question. You can start that way, but now I'm engaged. I'm listening, active listening, being curious, seeking to understand, maybe allowing the conversation to go deeper. I mean, these are all connected skills that we're not seeing in organizations. We're seeing like a deficit of connection and the ability to connect. So it's like the podcast is like, without the going to some learning and development class, a way also to start to build this muscle, which is really exciting. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, what also reminds me of is the cultural connectedness that we literally just talked about this
Yeah.
morning. It's connectedness of the cultural norms within your organization. And one thing that Greg said that I really liked too was along the, it's okay if they go somewhere else, take their podcast somewhere else. And one thing I always
Yes.
say is, you, as an organization, if I'm putting together a strategy for an org, I just want to be a good place to come from, right? And if we're a
Yes.
good place to come from and we've developed those relationships and we've had those conversations, they're brand ambassadors beyond the termination letter, And so to me, is there it almost feels like there is that learning and development, there is that knowledge share, that connectedness, interwoven theme that I'm hearing. And even now I'm just rambling, but like AI, we talk about AI implementations and whatnot. Why, let's have the conversation. People get a little jumpy around it. Let's talk about how we're implementing it in our organizations. What's working, what didn't work, what did we learn, where things like that. But I think for me mostly is wondering, Greg, from your standpoint, do we need themes? Like you said, we can do seasons, and depending on who you want to build those relationships with, but do we need, like, how important is brand identity within these conversations? Do you kind of let go a little bit of that because we're having those conversations, or because there's just so many possible conversations that you could have on a podcast?
I mean, I think the answer to that is the guide of what you want the relationship to be and how you're trying to fuel that. So if it's an internal one, I mean, vulnerability is a key piece, and I think you mentioned it. I love Brene Brown. So there's the how do I be vulnerable without telling you everything that's going on in my life? It's like you could still as a leader, we know that skill set, or we're working on that skill set ideally. But if I'm trying to do this with internal employees, you know, I want them to know me. Like that is a key piece that once again, if this is going to be something that others are going to be listening to, I want them to be, I like Greg. He's approachable. He doesn't know all the answers. He's doing the best he can, but he's creating this environment, this culture that we all want to work for. We all are happy to, even when those moments are difficult. It's like we just did layoffs or no one got a raise or whatever the difficult piece may be. The human component is what's missing. I think, and part of my LinkedIn, one of my titles, relationship generator, but it's also a humanization person. And too often we're numbers in a spreadsheet. We aren't real people. So how do we, as leaders, help create that human component of what this company stands for? Not just the values we've got there beyond us, but ultimately, how are we living those values? How are we showing those values? How are we creating a culture that is human and creating that? Because at the end of the day, you can say AI is going to take all of our jobs. Sure, but you still need the human component. Even if all of our jobs somehow get taken by AI, it's that human component, it's that relationship that's going to keep us all connected. And so I think from that standpoint, that's kind of how I would answer your question of like, what do I want to get from these questions? What do I want to get from these conversations? Each person's going to answer that individually. Do the seasons if you want, or talk to, if you've got 300 employees in your company, well, that's 50 episodes right there. And that you could cover in a year. If you're like, I don't have the time, then do it bi-weekly. Like no one is saying that you have to do it weekly. That's just what I love because it's a relationship generation there. But if you don't have the bandwidth to do all that, then great, break it up into seasons. But I still believe the whole point of our conversation here is everyone should have a podcast using it for the relationships and development you want. I don't think I've said it, but like podcasting is the greatest relationship generator that fuels your know, like, and trust, that builds a content flywheel. So if we look at that, I'm now building relationships. More people get to know not necessarily just me as the host, but my company, who I'm working for, others, other companies, other industry leaders that may be listening to this, that I'm using it as a marketing, a retention, recruitment, whatever it may be. And then the content that comes out of it. I mean, hopefully there's good nuggets that your guest says and they turn into little clips. Maybe they just ramble and you're like, great, I'm going to aggregate these 5 conversations that I've had with these 5 employees or 5 vendors or 5 leaders. And as you said, Marnie, how do I turn this into whatever that survey or whatever piece of content I may want to, because right now, I have to imagine most of us aren't recording the conversations, because what HR conversation wants to be recorded when it's on a podcast? It becomes a little different.
Yeah.
And now you get actually the feedback. You start getting actual data that you can use. You start learning what more are your employees saying, what more are your vendors saying. So there's a lot to the value of having a podcast for anyone, specifically, the anyone that's listening to this.
And it's the storytelling too. A lot of times
I was just thinking of story. No, you go.
but I mean, we talk about that. I think a lot of the mentoring and the coaching and counseling that we do, particularly for co-founders and startups and whatnot, is we forget to tell our stories. And there's so much powerful lessons that you learn from hearing other people in different situations. And even if that story is not apples to apples, the story that someone else is walking through at that moment, they still learn from it. So a strong tool for learning and development as well. Idea generation. And I know we have about 10 minutes left, but I do have one more question as far as like for those people who say, I don't have good ideas. I can't come up with, creative, like this is what I think should be on a podcast. Any, good suggestions as far as those people who are drawing a blank but think that they might want to do this?
I would start with just, I guess, the real life example of like how I started my own podcast and where that came from, right? So I looked at the market, and my podcast is about podcast networks. So I saw there were so many podcasts out there about podcasting. I don't want to be a guru teaching other people about podcasting, but no one was talking to podcast networks. I'm like, great, there's a little niche that I could fulfill, that I can already having these conversations with podcast networks. So let's now, instead of having a one-on-one call with this person where you do let's talk about podcasting, let's talk about life, let's talk about yada yada, let's actually do an hour focus on just podcast network. And then from there, the first question that came to mind is like, well, what is a podcast network? Great. Every guest I'm going to ask, the first question will be, how do you define a podcast network? Right. And so from there, it just then like, well, what else do I want to know? Like, okay, well, how did you get into podcasting? How did you start a podcast network? Right. So going back to what Mindy was saying, it's all curiosity. So if we think about how did you end up working at this company? How did you start your career? Like, the joys of being an HR leader is looking at the person's through line, or going, did this person stay within this industry, or did we hire outside of this industry? Hey, how did you end up at this company? Because your background is X, Y, and Z, and you didn't actually come from, I don't know, whatever industry our company currently works in. Like, what made you want to change industries? Like, you're just getting curious. You're able to start asking those questions. And then you'll start understanding, like, what story do I want to tell? I like that you call that, because part of a podcast is, and I just came back from a conference, and so part of the conference was, it was the academic space, and everyone's talking about rigor. And I'm like, I never hear that word, but it's big in the academic world. But part of every speaker that was using that word was saying, you need to tell the good story, because no matter how much you researched, how factual you're telling, people still want to lean into a story. So give me a story to tell. Otherwise, no one's going to listen, and you're going to lose the message of what you were trying to give in the first place. So the curiosity of like, what story do I want to tell? What questions do I want to get answered for my own self that would ultimately help fuel? So that becomes another piece. Like, if you're a beginning HR leader, or an assistant, or you're just coming up, like maybe your questions, maybe you start interviewing other HR leaders. You're like, hey, who do I learn from? Because technically the only person you can learn from is your boss right now. And let's be honest, we all know how that goes. You're like, I want to ask my boss a question, but I don't know. I want to feel stupid, whatever. So great. You start asking other leaders, and you bring them on, and you're like, oh, now your boss is looking at you going like, wow, you are improving so much more, yada, yada. And it's not just my tutelage of doing it, but because you've gone out there and you've sought mentorship from everyone else. And now if a good boss is looking at that and going, hold on, I don't want you talking to all my competitors or all these other HR leaders, because you're going to leave me and then I've just lost you. well, then you're not actually being a good leader in that first place, because you should want them to gain knowledge, but you still should be able to keep them within your company and going like, I'm giving you the wings to grow. I'm giving you the wings to do and do what you want to be doing. And I am the leader for you, but I can't teach you everything. So you're out there gaining some more perspectives. Like those are all good things you can be thinking about. But you're right. It comes to storytelling. What's the story I want to tell? Curiosity is going to kill the cat in this regards. And it's a good thing.
I love that. I mean, there's that also is like that's a shift in mindset. That's a leader that's thinking about it either from scarcity or from possibility and abundance. And so, as a leader, where am I and why am I? Why is this feeling coming up for me where I'd want to squash something and take autonomy away from my person? Well, it's probably something I need to reflect on and understand deeper. And also, we just had a podcast episode go live. We were talking about quality motivation, and I keep hearing in this about connected culture. How are we truly motivating individuals in a way of care? And that's not to get to a forced outcome, or that feels like just an activity that we do. So they're not really getting value, like feeling valued from it. It was like what you're saying. It's around personal connectedness, relationship building. And if we counted that, the word's probably been used 1,000 times in just its time together. But also autonomy, and which is like trust and allowing that person to go and have the freedom to do that. But then it's also around competency building and being able to feel like you're growing and progressing towards something. So it's this podcasting also hits all three of the kind of basic fundamental criteria of quality motivation.
Mic drop, sold, done. You're right. Yeah. I mean,
it was like conversation to me now. I was like, I knew podcasting is awesome. And when we were talking together, I was like, is it a crazy idea that every person, because I love how you say that. And I was like, HR people, everyone a podcast. But then I was like, when I hear you talk about it, I'm like, yes, they should. All employees should have a podcast. And this, like, you just like re-cemented that even further for me today.
I mean, if you look at every different avenue you could think about attaching a podcast to a goal. So how do I look at retention? How do I look at recruiting? Great. So what's the content I'm putting out there? Most likely, you're not putting out a lot of content from a why should I work at this company standpoint. If I'm going on Glassdoor and I'm reading reviews, imagine if I had a podcast that actually gave me real 30-minute, 40-minute conversation of like what it's like working there, as opposed to the disgruntled employee that left or the person who's like, oh yeah, this is great in leadership. It's like you get to put that all in a podcast now and have it as the control. As we talked about, you're able to fuel the conversations, connections with employees who are now out there talking. So while I like my podcast is my own podcast, it has nothing to do with and it's not tied to my company, but that doesn't mean I'm not saying on my own podcast, like I'm the head of relationships for RSS.com. This podcast has nothing to do with RSS.com. So imagine now every employee that's probably doing the same thing. They may not be talking about, I work at company, or this is a company X podcast, but like, I'm currently working at company X. So now you're getting marketing materials about this employee saying, wow, I want to go work for a company where their employees are actually allowed to have these conversations, to build connections, to build these relationships. And that's going to fuel from a company standpoint. More employees want to work for you. More employees want to stay there. More vendors want to work with you. More sales can happen. Like you've now, in a sense, as an HR leader, fueled what you should be doing as a company standpoint, all of that and tying that all together. And then you look like a really winner. I was going to say something else, but I won't swear. So yeah.
Well, you can swear, hell, but
No,
I mean,
You look like a
double
badass.
mic drop.
At the end of the day, you'll be the badass.
yeah,
Like,
HR badassery.
Yeah.
people are going to talk about the company no matter what, no matter where they're writing, Reddit, Glassdoor, Blind. They're going to be talking about your company.
Yeah.
You can't stop that.
But you can control part of that narrative. You can
Yes.
build the relationships that matter. and you can humanize it. And that's becomes the
Yes.
big piece, because right now there's no humanization. There's the distrust. If I go read something on Glassdoor, or it's like any Yelp review, right? It's like, was this person paid to put up there? Were they asked, please write this review? It's the, do I trust this? There's not a lot written about it. And then every HR person's got an answer going like, oh, that was a disgruntled employee, or, that's old. We've changed our culture. Like, when you actually have a podcast, you're able to show all those things. So like, yeah, this is where we are. This is where we're going. This is
Yeah.
what we want to do. And our culture is, we're living and breathing that culture component.
Okay, with that said, I think you have to jump to recording your own podcast with
Yes.
someone else.
Yes.
Where can people find you, Greg?
So this is the fun part. I'm the do as I say, not as I do person. I live on LinkedIn. I don't have a website. I live on LinkedIn. Greg Wasserman. It's where I've been since 8. It's where I continue to live. I post content 5 days a week, and I love creating connections. So please, this is the other side, and we haven't touched on, but I always love ending like this. Like, the joys of having a podcast is someone's going to listen to it. And ideally, we right now are all talking to a void. And so someone's going to listen to us, and we're going to ask, please, not just rate and review this podcast, but reach out to your guest because they want that. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, Marnie, Mindy, X person just reached out to me. And Mindy and Marnie probably don't know who's listening right now. So they'll be like, wow, we now know who's listening and they found value in this episode. And that creates such a flywheel. So please follow me on LinkedIn, set up some time. Let's chat. I connect to anyone because you have no clue where a conversation will take you.
I love it. And it's true. Like, I felt like I was having a text conversation with Greg on LinkedIn. I've never had people real time respond to your messages.
I totally forgot about that. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for being on the shift, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much, Greg.